Blame the refs. Not sure about that one. Yes, so the big story coming out of this game, which I've finally had a chance to review, is that the refs are all to blame if you're France. Now, the reason this review is so late is I was at Paris, I was at the fan zone, and it was popping. There was no way I could take notes, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to sit back, relax, watch the game, have some beers, jump in the crowd, and kind of take this game in later. Plus, I thought there were plenty of things that were happening during the time that I'd want to look at for a second time. So, here it is. Here's the review. So, I'm going to look at the game chronologically, just because it kind of builds to a conclusion for me. And if we go through the game, France started red hot. Power rugby that was sensational, impossible to stop. South Africa, known for their great defense, but they were just getting dominated in power rugby. And that was, I think, something that was really surprising for me watching the game. No one overpowers South Africa. No one can just run through their defense and find the gaps. And I think it was really down to Dupont's quickness to every breakdown. It seems like compared to every other scrum half in the world, he is just there like a second before everybody else, which means the defensive line isn't set. He can then pass it or kick it or do whatever he wants to get the ball out quickly, and it gives France that advantage. And they look sensational. Then I think the next thing of note really is the Etzebeth challenge that everyone is complaining. Well, not everyone, but I think a lot of people are complaining that they think it was an intentional knock-on. Not me. He knocks it backwards. It is a very smart play to knock the ball back with his hand, meaning that it is just a knock backwards and there's no infringement. And it's a very, very clever play. And I think there's nothing wrong with it. Later on, we have another attack by France that looks really promising. The French hooker, who I think had a great game. He made a great run, but then knocked it on the last minute. And I noticed France had numbers on the side. They could have scored a try off of it, but because of the knock-on, they made a mistake and they didn't manage to kind of get the ball over. This is one of many mistakes that we're going to go into. So, South Africa, they have their first try. It's very opportunistic. It's from a bounce from an up and under that seemed seemingly meaningless. And this is something that I think is not really being talked about. France's defense on the wings under the high ball was poor, like piss poor. The 2 tries by South Africa were scored in the first half from up and unders that were not defended very well. The first one, the winger didn't take a run up to try and catch the ball, which meant that he was up against Etzebeth, who had taken a run up and was physically going to dominate him, whether they were stood still or neither of them had run ups. So he needed to get in an angle and have a run up to the kick to have an advantage in kicking it. And even if he was like, say this is the pitch, even if he was hit and coming across the pitch to catch it and jump up in the air and get some momentum, that's what he had to do. And he didn't. And it allowed South Africa to collect the ball and score the try. The second South African try in the first half happens off something that's very, very similar. You've got 2 forwards that the up and under comes underneath them and they don't move at all. They just stay right where the ball is and they come ready to catch it. Obviously, South Africa have got momentum by running up to the ball and trying to catch it. And no one's going to want to say this because everyone thinks he's perfect, and he is pretty much perfect in every single little regard. But there was one back that was out there on the wing who could have defended it and gotten a run up, and that was Dupont. And in that, you could see that he was the only one that could get an angle to jump up and catch the ball. Obviously, he's shorter than the rest of the players, so he's maybe not the best under the high ball to do it, but he was the only player in a position to take a run up and take the high ball at pace to actually stop South Africa from just getting up in the air with their bigger players and whacking it back to their own players. And you don't want to criticize Dupont. He does everything perfectly, but if there's one weakness in his game, probably under the high ball, probably isn't the best, and that was exploited in that second try. And then we get on to the charge down by Colby. There's been many videos going around it online, speculation over whether he was offside or not, or he did something illegal. He's not. He's completely legal. He's studied Ramos's movements perfectly to make sure that he timed his run perfectly so that as soon as there was any forward momentum in Ramos's body, he was straight onto it. He did the charge down, and it was a real good example of studying your opposition and knowing them really well. Then there's another try by South Africa, and this is taking advantage of France playing really loose ball. I don't know what the hell they're thinking about playing pat a cake between their backs while South Africans are hunting them in defence. It's all sloppy, and of course they're going to just pick up the ball and they're going to go and score. So we're at now, in terms of the commentary, 28 minutes into the game, and the score is 19-12 to South Africa. And that's 3 tries out of those points. So with the conversions, what are we looking at? Like, I think there was one of those conversions was missed. So like all of the points. It took me way longer than it should have to do that. All of their points of those 19 points are made up of French mistakes. French mistakes under the high ball twice, and French mistakes in attacks being far too loose and trying to slap the ball back to a player that's on the outside. It was poor. It was not well-disciplined rugby. And then France have got no one to blame but themselves for those 19 points and allowing South Africa to stay in the game. Anyway, charging forwards with the chronological order. I thought Libbok in the first half did not have a great game. He was about a 6 out of 10. He missed a kick. He didn't look like he was the difference in attack that he has been in previous games since I've seen him come into the South African squad. And I really feel like this is maybe their last chance he gets, considering this is knockout rugby to start. I think he really earned his starting 10 position with the way that he played in the warm-up games in the Rugby Championship. He really took on that 10 shirt, showed an attacking style of rugby that South Africa's never really had before in terms of keeping possession and being a great distributor. But his kicking from the place kicks is not good enough. His attacking prowess seems to have dwindled as time's gone on. And I'm not sure really what his value is in terms of starting at the 10 shirt now that Andre Pollard's back and he managed just to steady the ship in the second half. So it's a shame. I'm a huge fan of his. I love the way he played, both in the Rugby Championship and the warm-up games, but I feel like next week we will not be seeing him at the 10 shirt. The Etzebeth head-on-head is a penalty at max, in my opinion, compared to how the rules have seemingly changed. I'm talking about what we saw in the England game as well of the weekend. It seems the refs are starting to realise, just like I have, that this ruling needs to be changed, even though there's no official ruling in it yet. I think we're starting to see referees police this a little bit less and less, you know. I don't know. I feel like he's tried to go down low, and the opposition has just managed to make him. He's just misdirected him, and he's ended up colliding with the head. I would have given it as just a penalty myself. I can understand the card. I'm not like too up in arms about it. So yeah, could have been a yellow card, could have been a penalty. I think if it was a red card, I'd be up in arms about it. But hey ho, it is what it is. I think the South African scrum held up really well with Eben out. They did really well to not get dominated for the time he was off. And I think that's a real understated fact in this game that a lot of people won't be talking about. The fact that the South African scrum really managed to hold out and didn't allow themselves to get dominated by France once Eben was off for those 10 minutes. Especially, I think they put Delander at the flanker position in those scrums. So really well done by them for holding steady. And that was the first half. Moving into the second half, 44 minutes in, Snyman is on, Faf's on, Pollard's on. And I thought at this time that maybe the substitutes have been brought on too early, like they had with the Ireland game. I thought they kind of prematurely, for lack of a better terminology, they prematurely detonated their Bond squad, I think, in the Ireland game. In this game, I thought they'd done the same. However, I think what's missed with this decision is that the French subs, a lot of the French subs that were key, I think the Luced came on, many of the players for France on the bench came on pretty soon after that. And thinking about it, I'm thinking maybe it was a tactic of South Africa to pressurise the French to bring on the fresh legs. I mean, let's be honest, the bomb squad, hugely famous at this point. Everyone knows it's a tactic. And we did see the French subs come on quite soon after the South African subs came on. And I think if you looked at the two benches between South Africa and France, which one's stronger? Who's going to have an advantage between if those players had to play compared to the starters for both teams? I think it's quite obvious that it would be South Africa. So there's a part of me that thinks maybe that was a tactic to bring them on as early as they were. Maybe if they were winning comfortably, that wouldn't have happened. But I think it was it maybe felt panicked at the time, but kind of looking at it retrospectively, once I saw the French subs come on, I started to think that maybe it was a tactic that was happening on purpose, which I think is very smart, considering that your bench is stronger than France. You probably thought that France would bring on their substitutes, knowing about the bomb squad, to maybe try and compete with you. And if you maximise the amount of times that your stronger bench is playing their weaker bench, you probably have a greater chance to win. So, interesting take. I would love to have a conversation with the South African coaching staff about that in the future, if that ever if that ever happens, I would consider it an absolute blessing, just to see what their thinking was about the 44-minute changes. I just think that's maybe what they were doing. Khaleesi was off at 46 minutes. I thought that was huge. I thought, how have they won the game with Khaleesi off? But his substitute came in and played very well, had some really key runs that really set South Africa to win the game in the end. France have another great attacking play just before Etzebeth comes back on, but they actually fluff it by kicking it out the back of a ruck, where if they had managed to just keep the ball and they were already over the gain line, they had the advantage, and just before Eben comes on, they could have scored another try. And this is now, what are we on? 3-4 mistakes that France have made where they could have put the game away. We're talking the 2 high balls. We're talking about knocking the ball on in a key attack with the hooker that I talked about earlier. Ramos taking too much time on the kick to allowing himself getting charged down, and then they fluff the attack just before Etzebeth comes off. So we're on like 4 or 5 right now, and we're not even into kind of like the 60-minute mark. So yeah, keep that in mind, because that's going to be in the summary that I have at the end of the game. Obviously, there's a big hoo-ha about the referee and not doing a good enough job, especially, I think, France fans and the French media. When I was over there in Paris, it definitely seemed like the French media was all over this. It was all over the news. It was all over everything. And I have to say, I think Ben O'Keefe did well. I think, but just as a criticism, I do think there was one player that should have had a yellow card, and he was on the South African side, and that was Kitchoff. Stephen Kitchoff, he got penalised at least 4 times for things that were really cynical in open play. I'm talking about putting his hands in the ruck when he shouldn't have in a key attacking play. Did that multiple times. Always found himself in a place where he shouldn't have been, offside. I mean, he's a great player, don't get me wrong, but it was not a highlight of his career in terms of his performance. And he definitely, I think the 4 penalties for me made me think he probably earned a card. And funny enough, when I wrote that comment that he's had 4 penalties, he should be off, very soon afterwards, he was taken off and substituted off for another player. So maybe the South African coaching staff was thinking maybe we've got a bit of a get out of jail free card here by being able to take him off. He really did not have a great game, and I honestly think that one mistake Ben O'Keefe made was not giving him a yellow card sooner. So I have to say that, to be completely honest. I think that's true. I don't think that's unfair to say. I think anybody with a level head would agree with me in that regard. And then we get onto the Jalabert kick that goes backwards, and it wasn't the only one. There was also another kick out of hand by Thomas Ramos that was completely an unforced error that did something very, very similar. And these are just another 2 mistakes that I think we're up to like 6 or 7 now in terms of adding up to what France could have done differently to win the game. And it really is a shame. I noticed Mofana came on for Jalabert. And if you watch my pre-game show, my preview show, I thought that maybe this is a chance for Hastoy to come in and show what he's been doing at La Rochelle, steady the ship, and against South Africa, maybe he was the best fly half to come in and replace Jalabert. But he wasn't even on the bench. I think maybe that was a coaching decision mistake by France, to be honest with you. I think Hastoy maybe would have been able to come on, put France in the right areas of the pitch to ultimately win the game. But Mofana came on, and I don't really think Mofana did very much. I think Hastoy would have maybe been the better option to bring on at 10, change the game up, kind of facilitated the French forwards and backs to put them in a good position on the pitch to make a difference against South Africa. I've talked a lot about French mistakes. There were South African mistakes as well that France took advantage of, and you think maybe if a different fly half was coming on to try a different game style, maybe we would have seen something different. But instead, Mofana came on, and I don't think he really did much to change the game. And then we get to the final scrum of the game, and France win it. They make a wonderful break down the sideline, and then they ultimately get isolated. Eben Etzebeth, of all people, rushes back to come and cause a turnover by disrupting the play. And it just summarised for me the difference between the 2 teams. Who wanted it more? Both packs are obviously in exactly the same place from the scrum and rushing back to either defend or go into attacking support. Who's there first? The South African forwards. France did get the ball back. Faf de Klerk kicked it out of his own half. It's a strange decision for me. I think with the stability that you have in your forward pack, I thought you would have been able to just run the clock out for the last 2 minutes. I can get the decision. You've probably made the decision because you don't really want to give the ball away within your own half and then there's a penalty. But for me, maybe I would have trusted the South African pack a little bit more. But then that was it. I just think South Africa wanted it more and they ultimately won the game. France, with the almost 10 mistakes that I've talked about so far throughout this video, I think ultimately lost them the game. If they had just corrected, I don't know, 3, 4 of those mistakes, maybe even if it was just one. I mean, if we're talking about the difference in the game, Colby going for that charge down takes 2 points off and South Africa would lose. So maybe if they just corrected one of those 7 mistakes that I've talked about, they would have won the game, but they didn't. And I was quite incensed in terms of what the comments were from the French media and the players from France about the referees. I believe Dupont was asked after the game, do you think the referee's decision-making was good? My understanding is that, translated, he kind of just said he wanted to look at the decisions, but like kind of hinted that he wasn't overall kind of like happy with all the decisions that were made. And I certainly saw, as I said, I certainly saw all the media making comments about the referees making bad decisions. And something about this just rubs me the wrong way. I mean, there were so many mistakes throughout this game that you could have corrected yourself. You could have done to win the game. It was margins, and to blame the referees straight away, I think it shows me you're not ready to win a World Cup, to be honest. You certainly wouldn't see any of the South African players doing it. There's only one person in the South African camp that would actually blame the referees, and that's Rassie Erasmus. And you can say what you want about him. If he made a burner account, and I personally, I think allegedly, if I had to, take a guess, I've got no evidence for this whatsoever, so I don't want any legal action taken against me, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did release the video of the referees on a burner account and kind of send it out so that everyone saw it, so the referees did change their game. But there's a difference there. It's not the players, it's the coaching staff, and he's doing that to deflect off the players, to take the pressure off the players, to give the attention onto himself, to change something about the game that he's not happy about. But I don't think you would ever see any South African players at the end of the game blaming referees. They would all take personal responsibility. They'd understand that it was within their grasp and their power to change the result of the game, even if the referees were putting the calls against them. And ultimately, I just think it's a difference in attitude, and it's why South Africa are advancing and France aren't. And it makes that 1 point of difference. And I think it's a really underrated part of sports that sometimes isn't talked about. As I said, I'm going to talk about this last paragraph here because I think this is what we've been building towards here. So what I've said is ultimately France have only themselves to blame. Their power and speed overpowered South Africa, but they were not clinical. There were so many errors, both the Jalabert and Ramos with awful place kicks, poor defence on the corners from the up and unders, overall physically dominated at the scrum, knocking on and fluffing crucial attacks that could have added more points, Ramos taking so much time to convert, meaning Colby could charge the ball down. All of this was the small difference between the teams. I think Dupont and the French media blaming O'Keefe is weak. Sure, one of the South African penalties wasn't called. Kitshoff probably deserved a card, but to go to that excuse considering you've played far from a perfect game is very weak, and it shows me you're not ready to win a World Cup. You're not ready to overcome adversity. You're not tough enough to overcome odds stacked against you. The refs missed a few things either side. It was a 7.5/10 performance for Ben. It wasn't the best game for him, but it certainly wasn't the worst by a far margin. If you compare that to the refereeing of, say, Matthew Renard in the England-Fiji game, I think there was a world of difference. And I'm not saying that from an England perspective. I'm saying that from a Fiji perspective. I think there were many calls that they should have been given that they weren't ultimately, and that could have been the difference between England winning. And as you know what's the real kicker for this, and a statement that I saw on the Rugby Union Reddit page, you never see a winning team complaining about refereeing calls. So is it really that important? Is it that much of a thing that needs to be fixed if the winning teams aren't saying that it was unfairly due? So no, I don't think so. Just my thoughts. Don't want to piss anybody off. I'm giving you my perspective and my opinion on it, and you can take it or leave it. It's just my personal opinion. As an England fan, to be honest with you, I'm happy that we're maybe playing South Africa rather than France. Not because I think one team's better than the other. I just think France's power attack would have just destroyed England very early on. Whereas at least with South Africa, you have two teams that, at least you're playing a team that plays a similar style to you, but obviously they do it way better than you do. But that's it. That's it for my comments in the game. Yeah, let me know your thoughts.